So again, I'm Aaron Arnett, and I work with Arnett Muldrow and Associates out of Greenville, South Carolina. And my company, I'm in South Carolina, as I just mentioned, but I'm always in Virginia. I'm doing work here constantly. I love this state from one side to the other. We work in small towns just like Clifton Forge, from one side of the state to the other. Most close to you all, I've worked in Fincastle with a superstar that's here in this room, which is Maria Saxton, which I think many of you all know, and the rest of y'all will know by the end of this evening. And we've just had the fortune of working here in this state. But as Autumn said, you know, I have been here in this town many times before, and every time I come here, I'm amazed. Y'all have done great things. You know, I look at your downtown footprint, and I just see these awesome, beautiful buildings on the outside. I see that you've got a really big downtown for a community that's kind of small, right? And then I see things like this building, again on the outside. I see your depots, which are beautiful, and then you come inside this theater, and it's just insane. I mean, you all should be commended for all the hard work y'all have done here, because you really do have a special community here in Clifton Forge. And so what I want to talk to you all tonight is about community branding. And what I'm going to describe tonight is, you know, why a community might think about branding, what is branding, the elements of a community brand, messaging, brand extension, and marketing tools, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after this. So the next slide shows, you know, really what is a brand. When you think about a brand, you know, quite often we think about Apple computers, we think about Nike, we think about Coca-Cola. I mean, those are some of the brands that are known worldwide as the most, you know, well-known brands. And so what is it? I mean, it's a promise that these corporations, these companies, these products make to their consumers. And that promise, it speaks to the unique values and the characteristics of that product. You know, it's Nike, just do it. It's Coke is it. You know, it's those things. And when we see those, we automatically, that brand has built equity over time to where we automatically know what it is and what it's about. Well, it's the same thing for a community. Like a shoe company like Nike, like a computer company like Apple, a community brand really communicates that value and those assets that a community has. And it tells that story to its market, its consumers. It's more complex than a product because there's much more layers to what a community is and who it serves. And one of the interesting things is here, you know, we think about communities and places and destinations and all of that. Virginia has one of the most well-known brands in the entire country, and we all know that. Virginia is for Lovers has been used for a couple of decades, I think now, if not longer, and they've got loads of variations of that, all the way down to their Love Work signs that we see in communities all across the state of Virginia. And that's something you'll hear me say over and over again. This slide, the next couple of slides I'm going to show you are showing you logos, but a logo is not a brand. A brand is that feeling that you get when you are communicated to by that corporation or by that destination. And we'll talk a lot more about that. So the next slide really talks about why would we brand a community. So first thing is, everybody's doing it now. Other communities are branding themselves. The ones that aren't really need to step up to the table because they want to differentiate themselves from the other communities that they compete with. It's just like a shoe company again. We want to make sure that we position ourselves to tell our story to make sure that we can connect with who our market is. So who is our market? we want to create a unified message that does really three things. The first thing it does is it builds local pride. We're communicating to the people that live in our community, the residents of Clifton Forge. The next thing we want to do is create something that's relevant to the visitors. Y'all have got so many assets and destinations in this community. I know that you all have a great visitor base, people that want to come and see your community. But it also has to be something that attracts new business or investment. So, when we think about Nike, their brand is looking at selling shoes. Well, your brand, there's different layers to that. It's communication, building local pride, it's external marketing, bringing people to come who want to visit our community, but it's also economic development. How do we communicate to businesses or investors that want to come into our community? And the last thing is, and you'll hear, again, I've already alluded to this, but you'll hear me say over and over again, a brand is not a logo. Ultimately, it's the equity you build in what that idea is, what that narrative is, what that logo is. And when a logo becomes a brand is when we build that toolbox of messaging and strategies to be able to communicate and market the community to other people. So to our market. The next slide, it just kind of shows, and I know y'all can't see all these because there's a lot on here, but these are just some of the places where we've worked in the state of Virginia, and we've developed brand systems for. And you see all these individual logos, and if you look here, if you pause and look, you'll see a number of places that are very close to you all. And again, it's not just a logo, it's that system. So the next slide goes into community identity as a whole. And the first thing is, next slide shows what we see in your community. So these are some of the graphics that we've pulled. We're obviously sitting right here in the Historic Masonic Theatre, which is amazing. Of course, I've already talked about that. But when you have any community, you have all these different brands that are being put out there into the market. We have our local identities. We've got the town of Clifton Forge. We've got Clifton Forge Main Street. We've got Visit Clifton Forge, and I think this is an older version of a Clifton Forge Main Street on the right. But that's our local identities. Then we have our destinations, and of course, as I mentioned, we're here in the Lodge. We've got the School of the Arts. We've got our regional trails and blueways. We've got the Arts and Crafts Center. We've got the Railroad Historical Society, and I know there's others because a lot of the businesses that you all have here, which are awesome, are also destinations in and of themselves, and they have their own identities, as we just saw previously in the speaker before. Then we have these regional identities too, like Allegheny Highlands, the Allegheny Foundation, our Arts Council, and the county as well. And what you see up here is really just some of those messages and those graphics that are being sent out into the community. And when we're thinking about a community brand, when we're thinking about telling our story as Clifton Forge, we want to look to these things. The main thing I want to mention here is you can see that these are varied. The graphics are different, the styles are different, the vibes are different, and that's great. And they absolutely can and should be unique, like what we see here on this particular slide. But when we're creating a new identity to market a place that is Clifton Forge, we want to, as best we can, try to find some connective tissue between these other identities to build something that will represent our community as a place. So really try to connect these dots between all these different assets that we have in these communities. That's the beginning of that platform of where that logo, that initial graphic starts to become a brand. So the next slide goes into One of the great analogy that we like to use is when we're talking about branding a community. We think about all those other identities we saw on the previous slide. We like to use the analogy of a university. So Virginia Tech, they have an academic identity. It's the official functions of the university, its academics. That's the message it represents, and that's what its market is. Then we've got our athletic identity, VT and the Hokies and all that. That represents really, for all intents and purposes, the marketing identity for the university. They're very distinct, and that's important because they have different targets and they have different messages, but they're tied together. Like I was saying from the previous slide, we want to find that connective tissue between all those identities that make a community special, to try to bring that under the umbrella of the place identity. Well, in this case, you've got very similar graphics, or fonts, you've got very similar colors that connect the academics of the university to the sports and that marketing identity. And I always like to use the analogy. You want to make sure that when your sports team has a really bad year, it doesn't impact the people that are trying to get into college, the people that are applying to the school. And this is topical because I went to Clemson, and I don't know if you are following the NCAA tournament, but as I was driving up here, we had an incredibly embarrassing loss today in the NCAA tournament. So it's important because these have very distinct purposes. We want to tie them together, but we want to make sure that they're unique. And the same thing, the next slide shows a community. So this is one that's just down the road from you all, Bedford. So there on the left, we have the Bedford town seal. And on the right, we have the Bedford marketing brand for the community. We want to make sure that town seal is on their official documentation. It's on the wall behind town council. It's on any official communication that the town has to the citizenry, particularly if it's saying, hey, your sign's out of compliance, you need to make sure that it becomes in compliance. But then we have our marketing logo. That's what's talking about what makes our community special. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this. You all know Bedford. You may see this here in this brand, but we all know that Bedford is, the home of the D-Day Museum, the Bedford Boys. They had more folks die in the Normandy invasion than per capita than anywhere in the country. So what we see here in that Bedford logo is we have the town of Bedford. We've got life, liberty, and happiness, which of course is a direct connection to Thomas Jefferson, who is, has a large footprint there in that county. But also we have that medal there with the symbol above, the ribbon above the O, and the O makes up that medal. It's all about patriotism. Their story, their message is we own patriotism. That's who we are. You see it when you're down there and you see how they're interpreting the Bedford Boys and D-Day Museum and their message. And then that's reflected here in this brand. So again, we've got our governmental identity, represents the official functions of the town, and then we've got our marketing identity that represents why we are such an awesome and cool place. That's how we approach community branding in everywhere we work. So the next slide goes into what are the elements of a brand. Again, it's not just a logo. It starts there, but it's not just a logo. So there's a number of different pieces to that puzzle. The first thing is, before you would ever get into a graphic, is what is our story? Again, in Bedford, it's about patriotism. It's about the Bedford Boys. What is our message that we want to convey to our numerous markets? The next thing is, okay, how do we how do we interpret that with a graphic identity? So that's when the logo comes in, and that's when we talk about typeface and color palette and icons and the whole 9 yards that you might see in a logo. And the last piece is a tagline. That's that message, that's that short little phrase that really reflects that market position statement, and that's who we are. Here's the biggest thing in the world about community branding. And we see this quite a bit when communities are actually trying to promote themselves. You cannot tell everything that's important and cool and unique about a place in a singular graphic. It's impossible. If a community tries to, and many have, put that entire story in the graphic, you're trying to tell everything and it gets so jumbled that you're actually telling nothing at all. What you ultimately want to do is just create that platform, get that foot in the door to where you can start telling that larger story. So the next slide really kind of begins to, I talked about all those different elements, starting with the brand market position statement, that brand narrative. And I'm gonna just kind of go through these different elements and some other communities where we've worked. And hopefully, I think most of these, if not all of these, are from Virginia. There's probably a couple of other examples, but most of these places you should be familiar with. And the first thing, as I mentioned, is that market position, that brand statement. And that's that story that we're telling about the place. And the analogy I like to use is that elevator speech. If you're in California and someone says, hey, you're on the elevator, and someone says, hey, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Clifton Forge. And you say, well, I've never heard of that place. Tell me a little bit about it. This would be that elevator speech. This would be that narrative. So what I'm going to share with you right here is from Stanton, Virginia. And I promise you this is the last slide, or really the only slide that has a ton of wording on it, but I want to share it with you because I think it might build in your mind's eye what you know about Stanton as a place. So, if you like a place where a thriving city sets its grid into the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, if you like striking views, spires and domes, and hilly streets, if you like a city of history where restored buildings house hip restaurants, shops, and galleries, if you like the plays of Shakespeare or sustainable architecture, you all probably know, if you're familiar with Stanton, the Great American Shakespeare Center is there in Stanton. It's a major destination. If you like a place where folks swap tips on how to restore historic homes and where the people take to the streets to celebrate. If you like a place where the independent spirit thrives in gifted artists and musicians and where the solitude of the mountains is just a short drive away. I mean, a lot of this could describe Clifton Forge, right? If you like a place of learning where colleges and schools inspire our youth. If you like a place where high tech meets down home. We are that place, the Queen City of the Shenandoah, where the spires of the city are our crown. We are Stanton, Virginia, as you like it. So again, that builds the message, but it also builds that creative that goes into building the brand graphics as well. So the next slide shows the Stanton logo. And there's 4 pieces of that narrative that fit into this. The first thing is, we all know this, we're in Virginia, we all know how to pronounce Stanton, right? But I've worked in Virginia long enough to know that I have to ask how a community's pronounced before I actually, verbalize the words of the communities. It's not Staunton, it's Stanton. It's not Fries, it's Freeze. It's not Pulaski, it's Pulaski. I know that. I know how to do that. But part of this, we know that we're always not going to get everyone the first time they see the word Stanton to pronounce it correctly. But by highlighting that U, we get our foot in the door again to tell that story. So that's one. The second thing is the crown above the U. They're known as the Queen City of the Shenandoah, and they're a very historic community just like you all are. Again, I know you all are familiar with Stanton, but their graphic and their vibe in that community led us to do something that was a bit more contemporary, and you see that contemporary icon of the crown above the U that represents the Queen City of the Shenandoah. The next 2 things are about the tagline. Again, I mentioned that we know that the Great American Shakespeare Center is there in town. As You Like It is one of his, famous plays, but more importantly, in Stanton, you really choose your own adventure in that town. There's so many different layers to the onion that is Stanton, and even within those different layers, there's different aspects of that community. And you as a business owner, or you as a resident, or you as a visitor, again, you create your own adventure there. So Stanton, Virginia, as you like it, was that tagline and that brand identity, which is the foundation of the larger system. So the next slide goes into brand extension. And then we see on the next slide some examples again from Stanton. So we showed that overarching community brand identity, that logo, and I talked about how that reflected the marketing message from a creative standpoint. But then the first thing that we do whenever we do branding is, once we create that logo, how do we grow it? How do we start to build equity in what that is, what that message is, what that graphic is? So we look at other things that exist in the community. And again, we want to make sure, and this goes back to the Clifton Forge slide that I was showing you before, everything needs to be unique. But as best we can, if we find that common creative tissue that links all them together, it builds equity in the system. So from the city of Stanton, all we did is we took the colors and the font from the previous slide, and then we applied it to their existing city seal, their city crest that we have there. They have an arts district there, and again, you see that. They've got, much like you have a Main Street organization here, they have one in Stanton that's called the Stanton Downtown Development Organization, and we created a unique graphic for them. We had a unique graphic business, as you like it, specifically for economic development. So again, all of these pieces of this puzzle are unique, but they're all connected together. That's when we're starting to build a brand. So the next slide kind of just shows an example from another community, which I think is somewhat relevant to you all. You are incredibly historic, like a Stanton, but you're also got all these wonderful outdoor recreation resources in your community and outside your community. And I say outside of community because your story about Clifton Forge does not end at the town boundaries. Your story goes much farther than that. And a lot of experiences, a lot of places, a lot of destinations that feel like they're part of Clifton Forge, or that the visitors who are coming to this area feel like is part of Clifton Forge. That story might be outside of your town limits, and that's okay.